Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to Bada Boom. This is Chris.
Hey, it's Troy.
Sorry about my voice. I am getting over a cold, but I couldn't go without talking about Justice League Crisis on Infinite Earths Part 1. If you know me, if you know the show, we love a good DC animated movie. And now we'll get into it if it's actually good. But this is the third time, I think, that we've had a Flash centric. I wouldn't say the last one was Flash centric, but the Flash at the center of a reboot. So this new animated universe is being rebooted, and this would be the third reboot in these animated movies. And I think 10 years. So it kind of tracks the DC
Man.
universe. But what did you think about the movie?
I'm sure we're going to dive into a lot of specifics, but overall, when we have Flash at the center of this movie, kind of like how the live action Flash was, there's a lot of jumping around, and some of it kind of doesn't make sense. We're jumping not only across time in this movie, but across different Earths. And it kind of makes it hard to stitch the storyline together at times because it's just like, wait, is this happening on this Earth or is it happening at this point in time or is that the future? Is that the past? It's just so tough, kind of like feel like there's a linear story. Even if you're like, I'm gonna ignore all the other characters and I'm just gonna focus on what Flash is doing, it's just it's so much. And the my biggest complaint with like the Tomorrowverse stories is that when we grew up watching these animated shows, Justice League Unlimited, Batman and animated series, all the Kevin Conroy animated movies that he was a part of, all those movies had like a lesson they wanted you to kind of learn or something they were trying to emphasize. And there was like a point to telling the story. And in most of the Tomorrowverse and even the previous regime of movies before the Tomorrowverse, that previous universe, it's kind of just like, hey, we're going to tell the story. And there's not really like a reason why we want to tell this specific story. It's just we're going to tell it. And it doesn't really make the movie feel cohesive at times, and you can kind of just throw anything you want to the movie, and they just threw so much stuff in this movie just kind of because. I mean, hopefully it makes sense in part two, but a lot of stuff I was just like, this is an hour and a half. This could have been maybe 45 minutes at most, and it would have been much better since I just threw so much stuff together.
Yeah, and talking about, you with stitching different things together, it feels like there's three movies in one.
Yeah.
There's the Flash and Iris love story. There is the Flash on Earth 3 with the Crime Syndicate. And then there's the formation of the Justice League when they fight Amazo. And all three have conclusions and lessons to be learned. I know you said there really aren't any lessons, but there are. The problem is that these are three distinct stories almost, they feel like. And because the Tomorrowverse hasn't done a great job of connecting these movies, this
Yeah.
movie has to do a lot of legwork in terms of being like, hey, because we never really formed the Justice League, we've referred to it and we've had hints like the end credit in The Long Halloween, some references in the John Stewart movie, but we haven't seen them all together. And I do think it's weird that the first time they're together, that you're like, okay, universe reset. And
Yeah.
because of that, it's I think the movie just has too much on its shoulders and it just begins to collapse at certain points. I do like the Flash and Iris story,
That's a great story.
which would have been fine, but again, because it's jumping between different places and spoilers for the movie, there's a point where you find that the Flash almost selfishly stops time and puts him and Iris in this time where they're able to live out their whole lives while the crisis is going on, which is really beautiful and great. But the impact of it is it goes away because you have all these other stories going on. And I'm sorry if my voice is crumbling, I could hear it. But it felt like the Flash live action movie where you're like, there's good parts to this movie, but because you never really established a Justice League or a universe, you resetting this universe means nothing because the reality is the cool parts are actually set up in movies that have nothing to do with this universe. Like
Exactly.
Constantine being the hobo, it's constantly showing up. So you're like, I get it. And I will say it is the best looking Tomorrowverse movie. I never really loved the animation style in this universe, but I do think it does really well in this outside of the part where they're at like the watchtower. And because there's so many characters, all the characters in the background are just still so
Yeah.
that they don't have to animate them. Yeah, I thought it was okay, but it is confusing. And the only way to make it kind of watchable is to really like hone in on the Flash and Iris because all the other stuff kind of makes no sense. At least to me.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. There's parts of with Batman, there's parts of Superman that I'm like, this would be a fun little Easter egg if we had established more of those universes in other movies. But it's really just like, okay, it feels like really cheap fan service at times. And they could have gone about like this time travel or earth jumping a little bit differently because like they use, like you said, John Constantine, and they use the Spectre almost kind of like how they use or and the Monitor. They use these three characters kind of the same way as the Watcher in the What If series. And you could still have it kind of be sort of chronological, but just have one of those characters do a little bit narration so it's a little bit smoother. It makes sense in the end if you've seen some of the other movies why John Constantine is there. It was a great way to put the Spectre in there from because he's not in a lot of animated material. Great way they brought in all those other characters on the Watchtower, but overall, like I definitely agree. Like it's the story of Barry and Iris, but there's so much other stuff going on that you can't really say it's their story because there's just so many different timelines, so many different Earths, all trying to go into the same funnel, and it doesn't really come out that well at the end for one storyline of Barry and Iris.
Yeah, and all these Tomorrowverse movies, you could skip them. And the reality
Yeah,
is the most important movie to watch to kind of understand this is the House of Mystery animated film. That movie has more to do with what's going on here than any of the Tomorrowverse movies. Because you have Constantine and you have the Spectre. The Spectre's talking about sort
yeah.
of Constantine and the Flash's punishment for what they did. And the Flash has done it twice. So I don't know why he's not like banished. Um,
He's just a good guy. They don't want to banish him. And the Speed Force, they say like the Speed Force kind of like saves him a little bit, but
yeah. So it is a little weird where you're like, well, because to be honest, I've skipped more than a few of these Tomorrowverse movies and I could follow. So maybe I need to watch some of them.
you don't.
I did like the Green Lantern one, Man of Tomorrow, the Long Halloween adaptation, but I don't quite count that. Outside of the end credit scene, it doesn't connect in any way to this. But yeah, I do think you make a good point. I think it definitely needed some narration. And what's weird is like we're making these criticisms and you're like, well, what about part one or the following part? This feels like outside of the it ends and there's a cliffhanger, but this story, there's no thread in it where I'm like, oh, I'm really excited to see where that goes and stuff like that. Because the if you think about it, the Flash's story is kind of over.
Yeah.
And you're like, where does this go? I do think part two will probably be better because you're like, well, this did a lot of the legwork of setting up the Justice League and all that. But, again, a lot of these alternate versions are not versions of characters from like other animated universes that you'd be excited for. Outside of Constantine, it would be cool if you're like, oh, here's that like new 52 Flash, you know what I mean? That reset that universe. Or here's, the DC animated version of this character. I think when you play around with like a crossover like that, that's kind of what you want to see. So yeah, I do think part two might be a little bit better structure wise, but this is definitely I feel like a missed opportunity. And sadly, this is the second time they've done this because they did it with the CW verse. Like,
Wonder
oh
why.
man, like they've really milked this storyline for everything it's worth, and it's never made it to the big screen. So, but yeah, I overall to kind of give my final thoughts on it. If you're a Flash fan, beautiful Barry and Iris story at the center of it. If you're looking for a great adaptation of the greatest, crossover event in comics history, this is not it. You probably want to go see Flashpoint. That one does a lot of that better. It was hard to follow, and there were some good parts, but I felt it made me miss some of the older animated
Yeah, it
movies.
definitely made me miss the older ones, and it's one of those things where it's great when you're watching it for the first time, and when more stuff comes out, it's like, man, it's kind of hard to stack up to some of those older shows. I do have a little bit of hope for the sequel, but that's only because we're talking about Monitor and this anti matter wave. I'm like, oh, are we going to bring in the anti Monitor, and is there going to be another Green Lantern arc in some sort of way? But I mean, I wasn't a big fan of the what they did to Hal Jordan in the Green Lantern movie, so I'm not going to hold my breath. But there's a little bit of hope of what we might see, but we'll have to wait and see. But I think, like you said, if you like the Flash, it's a great movie. Crossovers, comics were are a lot better, and the Flashpoint movie was definitely you can't beat that. Such a great movie. But let us know what you think. Watch it. It's available to buy, it's available to rent in a couple of days. Watch it, leave your comments below, and let us know what you think. And with that, bada boom.
Bada boom.